The deepest betrayals don't come from enemies, they come from the people who are supposed to be your safe harbor. My own family had spent years making me feel small, like a failure, a footnote in their grand story. Have you ever felt like you had to shrink yourself just to fit into your own family? This is the story of how I stopped shrinking and built an empire in the shadows they cast. The air in the ballroom was a suffocating cloud. It was thick with the cloying scent of lilies fighting a losing battle against expensive perfume, all of it layered over the rich, savory aroma of roasted duck. This was the annual Vance Family Foundation Gala, the night my father, Richard Vance, buffed his public image as a philanthropic real estate titan until it shone like a newly minted coin. This wasn't just any gala. Tonight was special. Tonight he was receiving a Lifetime Achievement Award, a heavy piece of engraved crystal that would sit on our mantelpiece as a testament to his greatness. The whole family was present, a tableau of success and expectation. My older sister Beatrice, a corporate lawyer with a predator's smile, was holding court near the champagne fountain. She wore a dress that probably cost more than my car, its sequins catching the light like a shark's scales. My mother, Eleanor, a ghost in pale chiffon, flitted nervously at her side, her entire existence seemingly dedicated to smoothing the way for my father and sister, ensuring their paths were free of any inconvenient wrinkles. And a wrinkle is exactly what I was. I was standing near the back, tucked away behind a potted palm, trying to blend into the velvet drapery. I felt like an imposter, a guest who had crashed a party she had no business attending. Just 2 days ago, my world had quietly imploded. The email had been cold and impersonal, full of corporate jargon about restructuring and downsizing. I had been laid off from my junior graphic design job. The shame of it was a physical weight, a leaden cloak pressing down on my shoulders, making it hard to stand up straight. I had spent the last 48 hours in a fog of panic, updating a resume that felt thin and unimpressive, scrolling through job listings that all seemed to demand 5 years of experience for an entry-level salary. And now, I was here, trying to look like I belonged to this world of casual opulence. My mother found me, her eyes darting around the room as if she was afraid someone would see her talking to me. "Olivia, honey," she whispered, her voice a strained, urgent hiss. She fussed with the collar of my simple black dress, a dress I'd owned for 5 years. "You look lovely, just—" She paused, and her grip on my arm tightened. Her gaze swept the room again, a frantic, bird-like motion. "If anyone asks, the design firm is going wonderfully. Just wonderfully. Don't tell anyone you're unemployed, your father would be mortified." It wasn't a punch to the gut, it was a slow, twisting knife. The lie itself was demeaning enough, but it was the casual assumption behind it that truly broke me. My failure wasn't just my own problem to bear, it was a potential source of public shame for the family. My unemployment wasn't a personal crisis, it was an inconvenience, a stain that had to be hidden from my father's important guests. I was not a daughter in need of comfort. I was a public relations problem to be managed. I just nodded, the words caught in my throat like sawdust. She gave my arm a final desperate squeeze, and then drifted away, drawn back into the orbit of my father's brilliant star. I watched the rest of the evening through a hazy veil of humiliation. The dinner service was impeccable, the wine was exquisite, and the conversation around me was a meaningless buzz. Later, the lights dimmed, and a spotlight found my father on stage. He accepted his award with practiced humility, a man perfectly comfortable in the warm glow of adoration. He began his speech, his voice resonant and full of a self-assurance I had never known. He talked about hard work, about vision, about building a legacy that would last for generations. He thanked his business partners and the city's benefactors. Then he turned to his family. "I couldn't have done any of this without my incredible family," he boomed, his smile wide and blinding. He gestured to the head table. "My brilliant daughter, Beatrice, whose legal mind is as sharp as anyone I've ever met. She has built such a stable, successful life, and I couldn't be prouder." Beatrice inclined her head, a perfect, polished princess acknowledging her due. My mother wept silently, dabbing her eyes with a napkin. Then my father's gaze swept out over the crowd. For a fleeting, heart-stopping moment, his eyes met mine. I saw a flicker of something, annoyance, pity, and then he looked right past me, as if I were a ghost in the chair. "And we all know it takes all kinds to make a world," he said, and a patronizing chuckle rumbled through his chest. The crowd, his associates and admirers, chuckled along with him, a wave of polite sycophantic laughter. "Even the dreamers," he continued, his voice dripping with condescension, "the artistic ones, who are still finding their way." The laughter from the tables nearby was a little louder this time. It wasn't hostile. It was worse. It was dismissive. It was the sound of powerful people humoring the rich man's indulgence of his wayward, creative child. I glanced at the head table. Beatrice was looking directly at me, a triumphant, cutting smirk on her face. It was a look that said, "See? This is what you are. A joke, a disappointment, a footnote." I was no longer a person. I was a punchline. I was the family failure, publicly labeled and neatly filed away. In that moment, the hurt was so vast and so deep, it hollowed me out, leaving nothing but a ringing, cavernous emptiness. My cheeks burned with a heat that had nothing to do with the stuffy ballroom. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me, some curious, some pitying. Then I saw her, Ms. Evelyn Reed, a powerful local philanthropist, and an occasional journalist, was seated at a table not far from mine. She was an older woman with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She wasn't laughing. She was looking at me, and then at my father on the stage, and then back at me. Her expression was unreadable, a cool, analytical neutrality. But she saw it. She saw the public branding, the casual cruelty of it all. I couldn't breathe. The perfumed air was choking me. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping softly on the polished floor. I didn't wait for the Black Forest cake or the coffee. I slipped out of the ballroom, a shadow retreating from the light. The sound of my father's voice and the polite, cruel laughter echoed in my ears all the way to the coat check. That humiliation wasn't just an insult. It was a catalyst. It was the cold, hard ground I had finally hit. It was no longer about finding another job to please them. It was about building a fortress so high they could never cast their shadows over me again. My tiny one-bedroom apartment felt like a damp, dark cave after the glittering opulence of the ballroom. The contrast was a physical blow. There, it was crystal chandeliers and the murmur of wealth. Here, it was a single flickering fluorescent light in the kitchen and the hum of an ancient refrigerator. The eviction notice taped to my counter, with its stark red lettering, seemed to mock the memory of the rich cream-colored gala invitation. Reality had a way of cutting through the haze of champagne and shame. My severance pay, a pitifully small sum, was a rapidly dwindling sand pile in an hourglass. It wouldn't last forever. It wouldn't even last the next 2 months. For days I was trapped in a suffocating cycle. I'd wake up with a jolt of panic, the memory of my father's words and my sister's smirk playing on a continuous, brutal loop in my mind. The artistic ones, still finding their way. It was a verdict, delivered with a smile, and it echoed in the silence of my apartment. Despair was a heavy blanket I couldn't throw off. I would sit on my worn-out sofa for hours, staring at a blank wall, feeling the weight of my own inertia. Then, the despair would curdle into a hot, simmering rage. I would jump up, pace the length of my small living room, my fists clenched. They thought I was a failure? A flighty, artistic dreamer with no ambition? Fine, I would show them ambition. I threw myself back into the job hunt with a desperate, frantic energy. I sent out dozens of applications for graphic design positions. I tailored every cover letter, polished every portfolio piece, and sent them out into the digital void. The responses, when they came at all, were a cascade of polite, automated rejections. "Thank you for your interest, but we've decided to move forward with other candidates." The volume of applications was overwhelming. "We'll keep your resume on file." Each email was a small, sharp pinprick to my already wounded pride. It felt like the entire world was confirming my father's assessment of me. I wasn't good enough. One night, unable to sleep, I sat at my small kitchen table, the eviction notice staring at me like a malevolent eye. I was drowning. I was out of options. They saw me as a dreamer? Fine. Let them. I would dream bigger than their real estate deals, bigger than Beatrice's corner office, bigger than they could possibly imagine. And then, an old idea, a spark I'd had years ago but had always dismissed as too ambitious, too unrealistic, resurfaced. It was an organizational app. The market was flooded with them, of course, but they were all cold, sterile, and complicated. They were built like spreadsheets, all sharp edges and rigid columns. My idea was different. It was an app built around the principles of intuitive, human-centered design, something that felt less like a tool you had to learn and more like an extension of your own mind. A second brain. It would organize your tasks, your goals, your notes, not in lists, but in a visual, interconnected web of ideas. It would learn how you think. It would adapt to you, not the other way around. I had a name for it, one that came to me in a flash of inspiration: Aurasphere. The name itself gave me a jolt of energy. Fueled by the last of my stale coffee, I grabbed a pen and a stack of paper napkins I'd taken from a diner weeks ago, and I started to sketch. I didn't just sketch a logo, I sketched the entire user interface, the home screen, the project view, the way a user would create a new note, the seamless way it would link to another. The ideas poured out of me, a torrent of creativity unleashed by years of frustration. I worked through the night, the only light coming from the street lamp outside my window, casting long shadows across the room. By the time the sun came up, the table was covered in napkins, a chaotic but complete blueprint for my dream. Looking at the sketches, I felt a flicker of hope for the first time in weeks. This was real. This was mine. But hope didn't pay the rent. The next day, I sat down and created a budget so strict it was almost monastic. I took my beat-up car, my one real asset, to a used car lot and sold it for a few $1,000s in cash. I went through my bank statements and canceled every subscription I had: streaming services, magazines, the gym membership I never used. My diet became brutally simple. I bought a 24-pack of ramen noodles, a giant jar of instant coffee, and a loaf of bread. That was my fuel. My life compressed into a monotonous, focused cycle. Wake up, code, eat, sleep. The world outside my apartment ceased to exist. I used the money from my car to pay for 2 months' rent in advance and to enroll in a series of online courses for Swift programming and business management. I knew design, but I didn't know how to build an app or a business, so I learned. The recorded lectures of my online professors became the only voices I heard for weeks on end. Their calm, instructional tones were a strange kind of company in the crushing silence. It was a tangible, grinding struggle. I was more lonely than I had ever been in my life. I was broke, subsisting on noodles and caffeine, and I was terrified. There was no guarantee this would work. Every line of code was a leap of faith. Every bug I fixed was a small victory in a war I might be destined to lose. But underneath the fear and the loneliness, there was something else growing: a sense of purpose. This work wasn't for a condescending boss or an ungrateful client. It wasn't to earn a sliver of my father's approval. This was for me. I was building Aurasphere not just as a company, but as a rebellion. It was my answer to the laughter, to the pity, to the casual, soul-crushing humiliation of that night. 3 months passed in a blur of caffeine and code. My apartment was a testament to my obsession, with sticky notes covering every wall and empty coffee mugs breeding on every flat surface. But I had done it. I had a functional, if slightly clunky, prototype of Aurasphere. It wasn't polished, and it had more bugs than I could count, but it worked. It was a real, tangible thing that existed on my laptop screen. Holding that prototype in my hands, metaphorically speaking, was the first time I felt like I had a weapon. But a weapon is useless without the strength to wield it. I needed funding. More than that, I needed guidance. I was a designer, a fledgling coder, but I knew nothing about the cutthroat world of tech startups. I started researching, looking for local incubators, angel investors, anyone who might listen to a pitch from a complete unknown. That's when I heard about a local tech hub that hosted monthly flash pitch sessions. Entrepreneurs were given 15 minutes and only 15 minutes to pitch their ideas to a panel of veteran investors. It was a long shot, a cattle call for desperate dreamers. But as I scanned the list of investors scheduled to attend the next session, one name leaped off the page: Julian Croft. The name was legendary in tech circles, but for reasons that were almost mythical. Julian Croft had been a visionary, the co-founder of a revolutionary software company back in the early 2000s. He was the idea guy, the Steve Wozniak to his partner's Steve Jobs. But a decade ago, he had vanished from the public eye. The story, whispered in industry forums and old articles, was a brutal one. His co-founder, who was also his best friend, had orchestrated a hostile takeover. Croft, who had focused on the product and trusted his friend with the business, was pushed out of his own company, left with a fraction of its worth and a universe of betrayal. People said the experience had broken him. They said he was bitter, reclusive, that he now dabbled in small investments more as a hobby than a profession, and that he was notoriously difficult to impress. He was the wounded mentor, the dragon guarding a treasure he no longer believed in. He was also my only real shot. Getting a slot was a battle in itself, but I was persistent. I called, I emailed, I sent a link to a video demonstrating the prototype. Finally, I got a confirmation email. I had my 15 minutes. I spent the next week doing nothing but preparing. I refined the prototype, squashing bug after bug. I created a sleek presentation, wrote and rewrote my pitch until I could recite it in my sleep. I researched every possible question he could ask, and prepared an answer for each one. I practiced in front of my bathroom mirror, my reflection my only audience. When the day came, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my laptop. I walked into a sterile, soulless conference room. The air was cold. Julian Croft sat alone at the far end of a long, polished table. He looked older than his pictures, and infinitely more tired. The energy in the room was one of profound boredom. He was wearing a simple gray sweater, and his eyes, when he briefly glanced up at me, were clouded with a deep-seated skepticism. He looked like a man who had heard 1,000 brilliant ideas and had watched 999 of them fail. "You have 15 minutes, he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. He didn't invite me to sit. He just crossed his arms and leaned back in his chair, his expression a mask of indifference. "Begin." I took a deep breath, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I started the presentation. My voice trembled for the first 30 seconds, but then something shifted. As I started talking about Aurasphere, about the philosophy behind it, the passion took over. I wasn't just showing him an app, I was telling him the story. I talked about human-centered design, about creating technology that felt like a partner, not a taskmaster. I showed him the napkin sketches, the proof of its raw, unpretentious origin. I walked him through the clunky prototype, explaining not just what it did, but why it did it that way. I didn't just show him an idea. I showed him my entire business plan, the market analysis I'd painstakingly compiled, my monetization strategy, my 5-year growth projections. I showed him every single piece of the fortress I intended to build. As I spoke the final words of my pitch, a timer on the table let out a soft, polite beep. My 15 minutes were up. The room fell silent. Julian Croft just stared at me, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. My hope began to wither. I had failed. He was going to dismiss me just like everyone else. Finally, he leaned forward, uncrossing his arms and placing his hands on the table. "Everyone has an idea," he said, his voice still gravelly, but with a new edge to it. "Every barista, every Uber driver, every kid in a garage thinks they've got the next big thing. Ideas are worthless." My heart sank. "Almost no one," he continued, his eyes boring into mine, "has a plan, a real plan. You do." He was quiet for another moment, studying my face. "They called me the idea guy," he said, a bitter twist to his lips. "My partner, my best friend, he handled the business. He told me to just focus on making the product beautiful, and I did. I trusted him, and he took everything." He leaned forward even more, the weariness in his eyes replaced by a sharp, intense fire. "I see that same creative spark in you, that passion, but I also see a toughness you haven't even begun to tap into." I see a fighter. He stood up and walked around the table toward me. I'll give you your seed money, he said. The words barely registered. They felt unreal. But understand this, Olivia. This is not a gift. This is an investment. I expect a return. And my investment isn't just cash. I'm going to teach you everything my partner taught me, the hard way. I will teach you how to read a balance sheet, how to negotiate with vultures, and how to build a legal wall around your creation so high that no one can ever touch it. I will teach you how to protect your throne, because believe me, the moment you have something of value, the sharks will come for you. They might even be the people you trust the most. His mentorship wasn't going to be about gentle encouragement. It was going to be a trial by fire, a masterclass in survival, taught by a man who had been to war and lost. It was exactly what I needed. The seed money from Julian wasn't a life-changing fortune, but it was a lifeline. It was enough to rent a small, cramped office space above a laundromat, the rhythmic thumping of the machines below becoming the constant backbeat to our work. It was enough to hire a small, dedicated team. I found 2 other developers, both young and hungry, who didn't care about a fancy office or a big salary. They saw the prototype, and they believed in the vision. Our new headquarters smelled faintly of detergent and desperation, but it was ours. With Julian's investment, and, more importantly, his relentless guidance, Aurasphere began its transformation from a prototype on my laptop into a real fledgling company. My life became a blur of controlled chaos. I was no longer just the dreamer with the napkin sketches. I was the CEO, the lead designer, the project manager, the head of HR, and on more than one occasion the janitor who cleaned the single sad little bathroom at the end of the hall. My days started before sunrise and ended long after midnight. The exhaustion was a constant physical presence, a dull ache in my bones that never went away. But it was an exhaustion born of purpose, a stark contrast to the hollow fatigue of my unemployment. Julian was ruthless as a mentor. He was not a gentle handholder, he was a drill sergeant. He would call at all hours, his gravelly voice barking questions. What's our burn rate? What's the user acquisition cost projection for Q2? Have you stress-tested the server load for 1,000 simultaneous users? For 10,000? He tore apart my presentations, circling phrases he deemed weak or uncertain. He ripped my financial projections to shreds, forcing me to defend every single number, every assumption. He made me role-play investor meetings where he would play the most cynical, predatory venture capitalist imaginable, trying to poke holes in my plan and my confidence. One afternoon, after I'd presented him with a new marketing deck, he threw the printout on the table in disgust. "This is sentimental garbage, Olivia," he snarled. "You're talking about user journeys and holistic experiences. They don't care about that. They care about market share and scalability. Never, ever let them see you as just the creative type." The words hit me like a physical blow, echoing my father's patronizing dismissal at the gala. "That's what they call you right before they dismiss you," Julian continued, his voice softening slightly, the anger replaced by a grim warning. "It's what they call you so they can pat you on the head, tell you to go make things pretty, while they take over the boardroom and steal your company. You have to speak their language. You have to be as ruthless as they are." Through all of this, I maintained a complete and total wall of secrecy around my new life. My family had no idea. My father, I assumed, had written me off entirely after the gala. He never called. My mother, however, would call every Sunday, her voice laced with a gentle, persistent anxiety. "How are you doing, honey? Are you eating enough? How is the freelance work going?" "It's going great, Mom," I'd lie, my voice cheerful and bright as I stared at a whiteboard covered in complex server architecture diagrams. "Really busy, lots of interesting projects." "Oh, that's wonderful," she'd say, the relief in her voice palpable. The only thing she truly cared about was that I wasn't in trouble, that I wasn't a problem, that I wasn't asking for money. As long as I could provide that reassurance, she didn't need to know any of the details. My success, to her, was my silence. Beatrice called me once, about 6 months into our development. It was a surprise. She never called. Her tone was the one she reserved for stray cats and inconvenient relatives. A cloying, condescending pity. "Olivia, darling," she began. "I was talking to a friend of mine. She's getting married in the spring. They're on a bit of a budget, and I happened to mention my sister was a graphic designer. They need some wedding invitations done. I could hear the unspoken words hanging in the air. Since you're clearly not doing anything important. It doesn't pay much, of course, she continued, twisting the knife. But I thought it would be something for your little portfolio, keep you busy. I held the phone, my knuckles white. A year ago, I would have been pathetically grateful for the scrap. I might have even said yes. Now the offer was so insulting, so comically out of touch with my reality, it was almost funny. I pictured myself, in the middle of a late-night coding session, stopping to design a floral border for some friend of hers. "That's very thoughtful of you, Beatrice," I said, my voice dangerously calm, "but I'm afraid I'm completely swamped with my current projects. I don't have the bandwidth for any new clients right now." There was a moment of surprised silence on her end. She had expected me to jump at the chance. "Oh," she said, her voice turning cool. "Well, suit yourself." She hung up without saying goodbye. I bit my tongue so hard, I tasted the sharp metallic tang of blood. The rage was a hot flash, but it passed quickly, replaced by a cold, clear focus. Let her think that. Let them all think I was struggling, designing wedding invitations for pocket money. This secrecy wasn't just about avoiding their judgment anymore. It was my armor. It was my strategic advantage. They still saw me as the unemployed daughter, the struggling artist living in a tiny apartment. They had absolutely no idea that I was spending my nights negotiating server contracts and my days designing a future they couldn't even begin to comprehend. Every condescending word, every pitying phone call was just another brick in the fortress I was building around myself. And from inside that fortress, I was quietly, secretly, building an empire. After nearly a year of relentless, caffeine-fueled work, the day finally arrived. We launched Aurasphere on the major app stores. There was no fanfare, no big press release. We simply flipped a switch and sent our creation out into the world. I spent the first 24 hours obsessively refreshing our analytics page, my heart leaping with every single download. The initial uptake was slow, a trickle rather than a flood, but it was steady. And more importantly, the users who found our app seemed to fall in love with it. The first reviews started to appear. Finally, a productivity app that doesn't feel like a chore, intuitive and beautiful. It's like it knows how I think. This has genuinely changed how I organize my life. Each positive review felt like a validation of the past year of sacrifice. Then, about a month after launch, we got our first real break. A small but influential tech blog published a review. The headline was simple but powerful. Aurasphere might be the most intuitive productivity app of the year. The writer praised our commitment to user experience and our clean, minimalist design. The article caused a ripple, which turned into a wave. Our downloads skyrocketed overnight. Suddenly, we weren't just a tiny, unknown app, we were a blip on the tech industry's radar. And that's when the first real offer came in. It arrived via a formal email from the business development department of a massive tech conglomerate, a company known for its rapacious appetite for acquiring and absorbing promising smaller companies. They were the apex predators of the digital ecosystem. They didn't innovate, they assimilated. They wanted to schedule a meeting to discuss a potential acquisition. Julian was wary. "They're sharks, Olivia. They smell blood in the water, in this case potential." But he insisted I take the meeting. "You have to learn to swim in their tank," he said, "even if you have no intention of getting eaten." A week later, I found myself in a glass-walled boardroom on the 50th floor of a skyscraper, looking down on the city. The executives were exactly what I expected: slick, charming, and radiating an effortless power. There were 3 of them, all men in perfectly tailored suits that cost more than my first car. They were effusive in their praise. They loved our vision, they admired our design philosophy, they were impressed by our scrappy ingenuity. It was all part of the dance, the seduction before the kill. Then they got to the point. They laid out their offer. The number they slid across the polished table on a single sheet of paper was staggering. It was an 8-figure sum that made my head spin. It was more money than I could possibly imagine. It was certainly more money than my father had likely made in the last decade. It was enough to walk away right then and there and live a life of unimaginable luxury forever. I could buy a house, a new car, travel the world, and never work another day in my life. I could prove to my family, in the only language they truly understood, that I was a success. But then came the catch. They started talking about their plans for integration. They wanted to fold Aurasphere into their existing suite of corporate software, and to do that, they would need to make some changes. Their software ecosystem was built on data monetization. They planned to harvest our user data, every note, every project, every to-do list, and sell it to advertisers and data brokers. It was the very thing I had designed Aurasphere to prevent. Our privacy policy, which I had written myself, was a sacred promise to our users. Your data is yours, and yours alone. We will never read it, and we will never sell it. Their plan was a complete violation of that core principle. They wanted to buy my creation only to gut it, to strip it of its soul, and wear its skin as a mask. After the meeting, I went back to our little office above the laundromat. The smell of detergent felt clean, honest. I laid out the offer for Julian. I explained the numbers, and I explained their plan for the data. He listened intently, his face a stony mask. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. He didn't tell me what to do. He simply laid out the facts. "This is your sell your soul moment, Olivia," he said, his voice quiet and serious. "Take the deal, and you're set for life. You'll be rich beyond your wildest dreams. You'll never have to worry about money again. You walk away clean, but the thing you built, the reason you built it, will be gone. It will become part of the machine you wanted to fight against." He paused, looking at me intently. "Or you can walk away from the money. You can bet on yourself. You can keep fighting, knowing that you might fail. You might end up with nothing. There's no right answer here. There's only the one you can live with." My mind was a battlefield. I could hear my father's voice, clear as day, echoing in my head. "Take the deal, you idiot. What are you trying to prove? This is what success looks like. Don't be a fool." I could hear my sister's mocking laughter, imagining her telling her friends about how her flighty little sister stumbled into a fortune. The money was a siren song, promising safety, security, and the ultimate final "I told you so." But then I thought about our users. I thought about the emails we received every day, from students organizing their thesis research, from small business owners managing their projects, from artists mapping out their novels. They trusted us. They believed in our promise. I thought about that night at the gala, the hollow feeling of being defined by someone else's narrow materialistic values. Was this really what I was fighting for? To become just like them? I looked at Julian. "I'm not selling," I said. My voice was steady. A sense of calm washed over me, so profound and so clear it felt like coming up for air after being held underwater. He just nodded slowly, a rare, small smile touching the corners of his mouth. "Good," he said. "Now the real work begins." Walking away from that deal was terrifying. It was an act of defiance against every practical, logical instinct, but it solidified my resolve. I wasn't building this just to get rich. I was building it to prove that a company could be successful without being predatory. I was building it to prove that my father's definition of success wasn't the only one. I was building something I could be proud of. My refusal of the conglomerate's buyout offer made a small, quiet ripple in the tech world. It was a strange move, and a few industry insiders took notice. An anonymous source leaked the story to a niche blog, framing it as a David and Goliath tale of an indie app standing up for its principles. I didn't know it at the time, but that ripple eventually reached a shore I never expected: my sister's law firm. Beatrice didn't know the exact numbers of the offer, of course. That was confidential. But one of her firm's major clients was connected to the conglomerate that had tried to acquire us. Through the grapevine of corporate lawyers and gossip over expensive lunches, she heard something that must have sounded utterly unbelievable to her. She heard that her failure of a sister, the one she had so magnanimously offered to find charity work for, was playing around with some little app, and that this sister, this family disappointment, had somehow found herself in a business deal and had possessed the absolute audacity to turn it down. To Beatrice, this was an affront. It wasn't about family. it was about her own narrative. Her entire identity was built on being the successful, intelligent, pragmatic Vance daughter, the stark contrast to my artsy, aimless existence. The idea that I might be achieving even a tiny, insignificant sliver of success on my own, without her help or approval, was intolerable. It was a glitch in the matrix of her perfectly ordered world. Her professional pride and a lifetime of sibling rivalry ignited into a bonfire of indignation. She couldn't stand it, so she decided to crush it. Beatrice was a shark for a reason. She knew how to use the system, how to weaponize fine print and bureaucracy. Through her firm's extensive resources, she began to dig. She wasn't looking for a crime, she was looking for a vulnerability. She assigned a junior associate to scrutinize Aurasphere from top to bottom. Our terms of service, our privacy policy, our corporate filings, and they found it. It wasn't a smoking gun. It was a loophole, a tiny, almost imperceptible ambiguity in the App Store's newly updated terms of service regarding data encryption protocols. Our encryption was state-of-the-art, but the way we had worded its description in our technical submission was, according to their malicious interpretation, slightly out of sync with the platform's new, vaguely written clause. It was nothing. It was the kind of bureaucratic discrepancy that could have been cleared up with a simple email. But Beatrice didn't want to clear it up. She wanted to use it as a weapon. She had a colleague in her firm's intellectual property division draft a formal, aggressive complaint. They didn't send it to us. They sent it directly to the App Store's compliance department. The complaint was a masterpiece of legal fear-mongering. It was filled with jargon and speculation, carefully worded to make it sound like Aurasphere. The app, praised for its user-centric design, was a massive security risk, a ticking time bomb of user data vulnerability. It was a lie, wrapped in the impenetrable armor of legalese. A week later, I woke up to a living nightmare. My phone was buzzing off the hook. It was one of my developers, his voice frantic. "Olivia, have you seen the App Store? We're gone." I scrambled for my laptop, my hands trembling. He was right. When I searched for Aurasphere, there was nothing. We had been delisted. An automated email from the platform sat in my inbox, citing a formal complaint regarding potential security protocol violations and informing us of our immediate temporary suspension pending a full review. A review that could take weeks or even months. The fallout was instantaneous and catastrophic. Our revenue stream, the lifeblood of our tiny company, was severed overnight. New users couldn't find us. Existing users started to panic, flooding our support channels and social media with worried questions. "What happened? Is my data safe? Did you guys get shut down?" The blog that had praised us now ran a new story. Aurasphere pulled from App Store amidst security concerns. The attack was vicious, professional, and devastatingly effective. We were bleeding money. My team, my 2 loyal developers, who had believed in me from the beginning, were looking at me, their faces a mixture of fear and confusion, waiting for answers I didn't have. For a terrifying, sinking moment, I thought Beatrice had won. It was over. All the work, all the sacrifice, all the sleepless nights, all of it was about to be wiped out by a single malicious email, born of petty jealousy. I leaned back in my chair in our small, suddenly silent office, and I could vividly, painfully picture Beatrice's face. I could see her sitting in her expensive office high above the city, a smug, satisfied smile on her lips. The thought was utterly, completely devastating. I had built a fortress, but my own sister had found a way to poison the well from the inside. My first reaction was pure, white-hot panic. I felt the walls of our small office closing in, the same suffocating feeling I'd had at the gala. I wanted to curl up on the floor and disappear. But then I saw Julian. He had come into the office the moment he heard, and he stood by the window, his back to me, staring out at the laundromat below. He wasn't panicking. When he turned around, his face was grim, but his eyes were blazing with a cold, strategic fury. This was familiar territory for him. This was the smell of betrayal. "She used corporate channels to attack you," he said, his voice a low growl. "She used the system, so we'll use it back, but we'll be smarter, we'll be faster, and we'll be better." His calm, cold anger was an anchor in my storm of despair. He wasn't wasting time on why. He was already focused on how. His first call was to a boutique legal team he knew in Silicon Valley. They weren't a massive corporate firm like Beatrice's. They were a small, specialized team of legal assassins who specialized in fighting big tech platforms on behalf of startups. They were expensive, but Julian didn't hesitate. "This is war," he said. "You don't go to war on a budget." Within hours, we were on a conference call. I explained the situation, the baselessness of the claim. The lawyers were immediately on it. While they began drafting our formal appeal, providing mountains of technical evidence, code snippets, and third-party security audits to prove that Beatrice's claim was not just baseless, but demonstrably malicious, Julian helped me execute a countermove that was nothing short of brilliant. "The platform's biggest fear isn't a lawsuit," he explained, pacing the office. "It's a PR nightmare. Beatrice attacked you in the dark. We're going to drag this into the light." He had me call the independent tech journalist who had written the first glowing review of Aurasphere. I didn't give her a polished press release. I told her the whole story. I told her about the buyout offer we had refused. I told her about the sudden, mysterious complaint that had appeared shortly after. I told her, off the record, that we had reason to believe the complaint originated from a law firm with direct ties to the conglomerate we had turned down. I didn't have to name Beatrice. I didn't have to accuse anyone directly. I just had to connect the dots. The journalist, smelling a huge story, ran with it. The article was published the next morning. The headline was explosive. "Indie darling Aurasphere delisted after spurious claim, a case of corporate retaliation?" The narrative shifted in an instant. The story wasn't about a potential security risk anymore. It was about a corporate Goliath potentially using shady tactics to crush a small, principled competitor. We were no longer the villains, we were the victims. We were David, and a massive, faceless corporation was Goliath. The public outcry was immediate and immense. Our small but loyal user base mobilized. They flooded the App Store's social media pages with messages of support. Someone started a hashtag, #BringBackAura, and to our astonishment, it started trending. Other developers, other startup founders who had faced similar struggles, amplified the story. The App Store, which had been a slow-moving bureaucratic behemoth, was suddenly facing a PR crisis of its own making. They were being portrayed as the bully's enforcer. Their public image was taking a direct hit. The change was stunningly fast. 48 hours after the article was published, we received a direct call from a high-level executive at the platform. He was deeply apologetic. He said our case had been escalated and reviewed, and the complaint had been found to be without merit. Within an hour, Aurasphere was back in the App Store. They even issued a rare public statement, apologizing for the temporary disruption and reaffirming their commitment to a fair and open platform. The victory was sweet, but the aftermath was staggering. The publicity from the incident was worth more than any marketing campaign we could have ever afforded. Everyone who had read the articles, everyone who had seen the hashtag, was now curious about this little app that had stared down a giant. The flood of new downloads wasn't a trickle or a wave. It was a tsunami. Our servers, which we had fortunately stress-tested at Julian's insistence, groaned but held. We acquired more new users in those 3 days than we had in the previous 6 months. We were bigger and stronger than ever. Beatrice's attempt to destroy me had inadvertently made me a star, and that stardom attracted a new kind of attention. A week later, I got a call from one of the most respected venture capital firms in the country. They weren't interested in a hostile takeover or a quick acquisition. They had seen our growth, they had read about our stand, and they were interested in funding our global expansion. Julian coached me for a week straight, drilling me on numbers, strategy, and negotiation tactics. But when the day of the meeting came, he didn't come with me. "You have to do this alone," he said. "They have to see that you are in charge. You are not the creative type. You are the CEO." I walked into that meeting, a woman who a year and a half ago had been living on ramen noodles, and I laid out my vision. I didn't just ask for money. I told them what I was going to do with it. I was confident, I was prepared, and I was unflinching. I walked out of that boardroom, having secured a $50 million funding round. The deal was structured to ensure that I retained majority ownership of the company and my role as CEO. I was no longer just the founder of an app. I was the head of a rapidly growing tech empire, funded by one of the most powerful firms in the world. And my family, who still pictured me designing wedding invitations for pocket change, had absolutely no idea. The irony was so profound, so deeply satisfying, it was almost a physical pleasure. A full year passed. It was a year of explosive growth and relentless work. The $50 million investment felt like rocket fuel. We moved out of the office above the laundromat and into a sleek, modern space in a downtown high-rise. We hired dozens of new employees, engineers, designers, marketers, support staff. Aurasphere Technologies opened a second office in London and then a third in Singapore. We were a global company. My life was unrecognizable. I was flying to meetings, giving keynote speeches at tech conferences, and making decisions that affected thousands of employees and millions of users. The press had started to take notice of me, not just the app. A few tech magazines and business journals had run profiles on the unlikely CEO behind the Aurasphere phenomenon. For those articles, I had made a strategic decision. I used my mother's maiden name, Harding. It was partly a nod to her, the only person who had ever shown me even a sliver of uncritical kindness, but mostly it was a shield. Olivia Harding was the CEO. Olivia Vance was still, in the minds of my family, the artistic one who was finding her way. The separation felt necessary. It kept that part of my life clean. Then, one crisp autumn afternoon, the invitation arrived at my office. It was delivered by a courier, enclosed in a heavy cream-colored cardstock envelope. My executive assistant, a hyper-efficient woman named Amelia, placed it on my desk with a curious look. "This looks important," she said. I picked it up. The embossed seal on the back was instantly recognizable. It was the Vance Family Foundation crest. My fingers trembled slightly as I opened it. The invitation was for the annual gala. The theme this year, printed in an elegant curling script, was honoring a new generation of industry. My father, it seemed, was planning to announce a new major philanthropic partnership. A knot of ice formed in my stomach. My first, visceral instinct was to take the invitation, walk over to the industrial paper shredder in the corner of my office, and feed it into the machine. I wanted to watch it turn into meaningless confetti. I picked up my phone and called Julian. I hadn't spoken to him in a few weeks. He had taken a step back after the funding round, transitioning from a daily mentor to more of an occasional sage-like advisor on the board. "I got an invitation to my father's gala," I said, my voice flat. "I'm not going." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Why not?" Julian asked, his voice calm and even. "Why not?" I repeated, a surge of irritation rising in me. "Because I don't need to. I don't need their approval anymore, Julian. I don't care what they think. Why would I subject myself to that? To my mother's nervous whispering, my sister's sneer, my father's pity." He was silent for a long moment. I could hear the faint sound of him breathing. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. "This isn't about getting their approval, Olivia," he said. "You're right. You don't need it. You outgrew that a long time ago. This is about something else." He paused again, letting the words sink in. "This is about you walking into that room, the exact room where you were once publicly humiliated, and standing there, not as the person they thought you were, but as the person you are. This isn't for them, it's for you." His words hit me with the force of a revelation. He was right. Avoiding the gala wouldn't be an act of strength. It would be an act of fear. It would mean that a part of me was still that girl cowering behind the potted palm, still scared of their judgment. Attending wasn't about confronting them, it was about confronting the ghost of my former self. It was the final test, not their test of me, but my test of my own strength, my own peace. It was about closing a chapter, finally and completely, on my own terms. I looked at the invitation sitting on my desk. It no longer looked like a threat, it looked like an opportunity. "Okay," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I'll go." I instructed Amelia to RSVP for one. Yes. I arrived at the gala alone. I had chosen my armor carefully. It wasn't a glittering attention-grabbing gown like the ones Beatrice favored. It was a simple, elegant dark blue dress, with clean lines and a powerful, understated silhouette. It was the dress of a woman who didn't need sequins to be seen. As I stepped into the familiar, overwhelming ballroom, the scent of lilies and wealth hit me. But this time, it didn't feel suffocating. It just felt like a place. My mother spotted me almost immediately, her internal radar for my presence still perfectly tuned. She rushed over, her face a familiar, frantic collage of anxiety and a strange, nervous pride. "Olivia, you came," she breathed, her hands fluttering around me. "You look so professional." The compliment was meant to be kind, but it was still filtered through her lens of what mattered. Then she leaned in close, her whisper the same conspiratorial hiss I remembered so well. "Your father is announcing a major new partnership tonight, a very big deal with a new tech company. He's very nervous. So please, try not to, you know." She didn't need to finish the sentence. Try not to be a disappointment. Try not to be an embarrassment. A year ago, her words would have stung. Tonight, I just felt a wave of weary sadness for her, for this small, frightened world she lived in. I gave her a calm, reassuring smile. "Don't worry, Mom. I'll be on my best behavior." My composure seemed to throw her off. She searched my face for a sign of the old, wounded Olivia, and finding none, she just nodded uncertainly and drifted away to take her seat at the head table. I saw Beatrice across the room, holding court as always. Her eyes met mine for a brief second. She gave me a dismissive, up-and-down glance, a flicker of a sneer on her lips, before turning her back to me, dismissing me as irrelevant. The gesture was so automatic, so practiced, it was almost comical. She was still playing a game whose rules had long since changed, and she was the only one who didn't know it. My father was near the stage, shaking hands, basking in the adoration of his peers. He was in his element, a king in his castle. He didn't even see me. My assigned seat was at a table in the middle of the large ballroom. As I found my place card, I realized I was seated next to a woman I recognized instantly. It was Ms. Evelyn Reed, the sharp-eyed philanthropist and journalist from the gala 2 years prior. It seemed a strange coincidence, but I would later learn that Julian, as a prominent, if reclusive member of the tech community, had a connection to the Vance Foundation's event organizers and had made a quiet request. Ms. Reed turned to me as I sat down, her expression one of polite curiosity that sharpened into recognition. "Olivia Vance, isn't it? It's good to see you again," she said, her voice warm and direct. She remembered my name. Before I could formulate a reply, she continued, "I was so impressed with the stand your company took last year during that delisting mess. A brave move. I've been following Aurasphere ever since. Quite the success story." My breath caught in my throat. She knew. She had connected Olivia Vance, the disappointing daughter, with Aurasphere, the tech darling. She was a journalist. It was her job to connect dots others missed. The calm I had felt moments before was replaced by a thrum of adrenaline, a low hum of anticipation. This was it. The story was already starting to unravel, right here at this table. Before I could respond, the lights in the ballroom dimmed. A hush fell over the crowd. A spotlight hit the stage, and the evening's host walked to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice boomed through the speakers, "welcome to the Vance Family Foundation Annual Gala. Tonight, we are here to celebrate a new era of philanthropy, an era of innovation and forward thinking. And tonight," he continued, his voice rising with theatrical importance, "Richard Vance and the Vance Foundation are thrilled to announce a groundbreaking new partnership with a true titan of innovation, a company that is redefining the future." I felt Ms. Reed's eyes on me, her gaze sharp and questioning. My heart wasn't pounding anymore. It was perfectly terrifyingly still. The setup was complete. The trap they didn't know they had set for themselves was about to spring, and I was sitting right in the middle of it. My father walked onto the stage to a wave of thunderous applause. He stood at the podium, basking in the light, a portrait of success and self-satisfaction. He waited for the applause to die down, then gripped the sides of the lectern and began his speech. He spoke about embracing the future, about the importance of legacy, and the critical need to support the next generation of innovators. I have always believed, he declared, his voice full of a deep, false sincerity, in fostering new talent, in giving a chance to those with the vision and the drive to change the world. The hypocrisy was so staggering, so utterly breathtaking, that a small incredulous laugh almost escaped my lips. I caught it just in time. That is why the Vance Family Foundation has spent the last 6 months searching for the perfect partner. We wanted to partner with a company that represents the very best of the next generation. A company whose visionary work in intuitive technology is not just changing the market, it's changing the world. He was so proud, so sure of himself. He had no idea what was coming. He gestured with a grand, sweeping motion to the massive screen that hung above the stage. And now, it is my great honor to introduce you to our new primary partner, Aurasphere Technologies. The name echoed through the ballroom. On the screen behind him, my logo, the one I had first sketched on a greasy diner napkin in the middle of the night, faded into view. The simple, glowing sphere of light, my aurasphere, illuminated the stage, casting a bluish glow on my father's beaming face. A sound rippled through the crowd. It wasn't an ovation. It was a collective, audible gasp. It came from the tables filled with the younger tech entrepreneurs, from the venture capitalists, from the journalists like Ms. Reed who knew the name. The rest of the room, my father's old money crowd, just looked on in confusion. I watched my family at the head table. The reaction was instantaneous, a slow-motion car crash of emotion. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with a terror that was quickly being eclipsed by utter confusion. Beatrice! Oh, Beatrice! Her wineglass, halfway to her lips, froze in midair. Her face, a mask of smug boredom just a moment before, went slack. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving behind a pale, waxy sheen. Her eyes, wide with dawning, sickening horror, were locked on the logo. She knew that name. She knew what she had tried to do to it. My father, bathed in the glow of the logo and the warmth of his own ego, hadn't seen their reactions. He didn't know the name. To him, it was just a cool, modern brand his foundation had chosen. He was still smiling, waiting for the applause. The host's voice boomed through the speakers again, oblivious to the drama unfolding in the room. And please join me in welcoming its visionary founder and CEO. He paused for dramatic effect, glancing down at the note card in his hand, to get the name right. Olivia Vance. The spotlight, which had been on my father, swung away from the stage. It swept across the darkened tables, a searching beam of light, and then it found me. It landed on me, pinning me to my chair. In the sudden, absolute, ringing silence, every single head in that 1,000-person ballroom turned. They turned away from the stage, away from my father, and they turned to look at me. My father froze. His hand, still raised in a triumphant gesture, seemed to lock in place. His smile didn't just fade, it evaporated, collapsing into a mask of slack-jawed blank confusion. His eyes followed the spotlight. He looked from the massive logo on the screen, to the host, and then finally to me, sitting in the center of that beam of light. I could see the exact moment the name, his name, our name, finally registered in his brain. The name the host had just said was Vance. The neutral observer, Ms. Evelyn Reed, who had been watching me with wide, shocked eyes, suddenly broke into a slow, brilliant smile. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated understanding. She had the story, the whole story. Across the room, I saw Julian. He was sitting at a table with some other investors. He caught my eye, and a wide, proud grin spread across his face. He gave me a single definitive nod. Your throne, it said. Take it. The ripple effect was a shockwave. My father's face went from confused to ashen. The blood had drained from it, leaving him looking old and frail under the stage lights. Beatrice looked like she had seen a ghost. She looked like she was going to be physically sick. My mother just stared, her face a mess of conflicting emotions, tears of shock and confusion welling in her eyes. The entire room, the entire Vance Family Foundation gala, was frozen in a state of stunning collective shock. Slowly, deliberately, I stood up. I smoothed down the front of my simple blue dress. The silence was so complete I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. I took a breath, and I began to walk toward the stage, each step sure and steady on the plush carpet. I walked out of the spotlight and up the small set of stairs to the podium, where my father still stood, a statue of shattered pride. I took the microphone from the stand. I turned to face him, and then the audience. "Thank you, Dad," I said, my voice perfectly clear and steady, amplified throughout the silent, cavernous ballroom. I wasn't expecting such a personal introduction. The next morning, I wasn't in a stuffy ballroom. I was in my office, my real office, the one on the 30th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the sprawling city below. The morning sun streamed in, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. My phone, sitting on the corner of my clean, wide desk, had been buzzing and vibrating non-stop for hours. A constant stream of frantic texts, and a long list of missed calls from my father, my mother, my sister. I hadn't answered a single one. I had simply turned the phone onto silent and left it there. There would be time for that fallout later, much later, and it would be on my terms, in my time, in a place of my choosing. Right now, I was busy. I was on a video call, looking at the eager, intelligent face of a young woman on my screen. She was a scholarship student, the first recipient of the Aurasphere Foundation's new mentorship program for women from low-income backgrounds who wanted to start their own companies. I had launched the program last month. Her name was Maya, and she had an idea for an app that helped dyslexic students with their reading. Her passion was palpable, her fear and self-doubt equally so. I was telling her what Julian had told me, all that time ago in that cold, sterile conference room. "Don't ever let anyone make you feel small," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "Especially yourself. Your vision, your idea, that is your fortress. Build it strong, protect it, and don't let anyone tell you it's not possible." As I spoke the words, I looked past my screen, out the window at the city stretched out below me. I could see the endless river of cars, the towering buildings, the millions of lives unfolding, and I realized, in that moment of profound peace, that victory isn't about the shocked look on your father's face. It isn't about the envy and horror in your sister's eyes. It isn't about revenge. That moment at the gala was a closing, a necessary severing, but it wasn't the prize. True victory is the quiet, unshakable peace that comes from building a life so full and so true to yourself that their opinions, their judgments, their entire world no longer have the power to hurt you. It's the freedom to define your own worth, and then, most importantly, to turn around and help someone else find theirs. My story is proof that your real value is never determined by the people who refuse to see it. It's built in the quiet moments of hard work, in the courage to stay true to yourself, even when no one is watching. What labels have you refused to accept in your own life? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your stories. And if this story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more true stories about overcoming the odds. Thanks for watching.